All right. Hello, everybody. We're just gonna wait a couple of minutes to see if there's more people joining or not, and then we're gonna get started. And yeah, if you can hear me all right, please just shoot me a note through the chat so I can see if I need to adjust something, or is it okay? All right. So I guess you can hear me. And we're 2 minutes past 6, so we might get started. It's just the title slide for now. We're gonna get started in just a bit. Yeah, during the presentation, if you have any questions, just write them in the chat window. I'll get to them as we go along, or I'll address them at the end, right? So now, if we, let's say we're ready to get started. So hi, my name is Viar360. I'll be with you today. I'll do this webinar with you where we go through 4 main points. I'm gonna present what we did with our editor update. We've been working on this for a while. I think we have a good foundation for the next version of our editor where we can move forward to more interesting features. A lot of the stuff that we did is not something that you actually see. We did a lot of development on the back end, which means that those are core features that you don't see. But there was a UI and UX change done as well, and I'm going to show you how all of that looks like. We're going to talk briefly about group sessions update, right? Group sessions is a feature that we presented on our last webinar, and it basically allows you to do group trainings in virtual reality. The third one is a roadmap review. We're going to take a look at a couple of items that we have on our priority list for the summer. And then in the end, we have some time for Q&A. But as I mentioned, if you have any questions along the way, just please write it in the chat window, and I'll try to address them as soon as we go along. The only thing that I should mention, there's probably about 30 seconds delay between what I'm saying and what you're hearing. So I might address questions a little bit later than I would like to. All right, so let's get started with our first point, right? So in the first two points are basically product updates, right? And what we did recently is we released a beta version of our new editor, right? So I'm gonna show this in the demo later on, but I just wanted to address a couple of things here. We didn't decide to basically go with a revolution. We decided to basically do an evolution of our current editor, right? We basically redesigned some of the UI, most of the UI, and we did some UX changes to make the whole process of creating content a little bit easier, right? What we also added is a scene switcher, which basically allows you to switch between scenes, so you don't have to go back and forward between your project screen and your actual scenes. And then also we introduced scene settings. So some of the features that we had that were maybe under story properties, we moved them all now into scene settings, right? So scene settings are now gonna basically help you define how your scenes look like, how they act, and I'm gonna show you later what's in there. Regarding the group session update, right? One thing that we added now is that under user role management, you have the option to decide to basically make user roles that have the hosting option, right? We added some user controls. That was like that was the feedback we got from our first beta users, right? That there are some additional controls that we some additional controls that we needed to basically make the experience a little bit smoother when you're doing it live, right? And one that we did the latest is the Windows support, right? So we now have a Windows app that you can download and install on your PC, and it's basically going to allow you to view content on a PC or to participate or host group sessions, right? All right, so I believe that the best thing to do is to show you how things look like. So I'm going to open up my demo account here. All right, first thing that we're going to take a look at is the editor update, right? So I'm going to go here under stories, and I think I have here, let's say, a demo. So if we go, as you see on the cards at the bottom, you have two options now. One is the beta access to the new editor. You can still open the old editor if you're attached to it, right? But let's say today we're just going to be focusing on this new one. And if I open it here, it's going to open in the browser, right? So it's basically this is a very simple 360 scene. To explain the UI interface here a little bit in the beginning. So everything that has to do with hotspots, with interactions, is here on the left right corner, right? You do the scene switching here in the top middle now, right? So you can go to either of my three scenes here. And then on the right, I have the scene settings, which basically allow me to define a couple of properties for each of the scenes, right? Some of the scene settings are global, some of them are basically on per scene basis, right? The way you add hotspots is still pretty much the same. Like we wanted to keep the same, like a lot of our, like from a couple of alpha testers, we got the feedback that they liked the principle of how they added hotspots. So we still kept the same mentality. You double click somewhere, there's temporary hotspot is created, and then you select one of the functions on the left side, right? And here on the left side, we basically, we organize this a little bit so it's not so overwhelming as it was before. Basically, it's kind of like grouped together into kind of topics of functionalities, right? We have the, the point of view, the transitions or exits, right? And the interactable content hotspots, static content hotspots, and advanced content hotspots, right? And if you want to like add a hotspot, it's still pretty much the same, right? You click here, I want to create an info hotspot, and now instead of this left side editor box, right, we decided to basically go with this central pop-up because it allows us to basically use a little bit more real estate than how we did before, right? So basically in the beginning, you're still, the workflow kind of stayed the same, right? What we just did is we organized it a little bit better. So you have like the main functionalities now in the first tab here, right? So you basically select, how you wanted this to open, some of the content functions are here, and then also the icon size, opacity, and like background color and so on. And let's just say here example, and just say here's some text, right? Because it's an info hotspot, we're gonna keep it classic, or maybe let's have it as an icon only, right? And then if you want, you can either just create it right away, or you can go under additional tabs here to basically see additional styling options, right? Like icon, title, content, or some advanced settings, right? Let's say we want to make this 150 height, and let's say we want to also make it here open as a pop-up, right? Open as a pop-up is something that we added in the last 3 months to all of our hotspots. Before, only a few of them had the option that, you know, like when you would open content, that it would actually open it in a central position as an overlay. But we received some feedback that, you know, a lot of our users wanted to use that with all our content hotspots. So now for all of the content hotspots, you can basically use this open as pop-up, and it's going to basically open an overlay. I'm going to create this one, right? So we still have here, right? If I click on it now, it opens the editing settings, right? But if I go to preview now here and I open this, you know, we see it, you know, it's opened as a pop-up, right? And maybe if I just show you how it looks like if it's not as a pop-up, right? And I go to preview, right? It's basically part of the scene, right? So that's the difference. All right. Now, another thing that we added here that before it wasn't so obvious is the hotspot list. So hotspot list is now here on the, it has its own icon in the menu. Before it was more of, it was on top of the hotspot, so it was a little bit confusing for some of our users. What's its function, right? Because it was on a, it's basically, it was as one of the hotspots, right? Now it has its own specific, its own special place here. So you can always basically open something, click on it, and then edit it, copy it, delete it, or so on, right? So the hotspot list basically allows you to, you know, get to your hotspots faster, right? Now, before I switch to another scene through our drop-down menu here, I want to show you scene settings. So scene settings basically allow you, you know, change the title, select the media file, right? You can change media files right from the scene editor now. You can change field of view, right? The field of view is the angle at which the camera is open, right? So if you make this a little bit smaller, it's gonna look like you're more zoomed in. If it's gonna basically, if you make it a little bit bigger, you're gonna get this fisheye effect, right? It's gonna show you more of the scene, right? But you're gonna have more distortions on the side, right? So for some of our users, they really don't want to have any side distortions, so they just decrease the field of view. But some of them, you know, they like to have it a little bit wider so they can go all the way to 90. And another thing that changed, we took the background audio hotspots, right? We had like under hotspots, we had a background audio hotspot, right? And we basically, you know, said like it doesn't make sense for that to be on hotspot, right? Because it shouldn't be triggered as an interaction, right? So we moved it into scene settings, so you can basically set up your, you know, background audio here. You can set it up as a loop or not, but mostly like what we see our users using this for is if you have any kind of room sounds or like you know, a file that will be placed that should be playing through the whole scene, like narration, voiceover, or something like that. For those cases, you know, use this one. Otherwise, you still have here the audio hotspot, right, which is basically an interactable audio content. Now you can also, like, one thing that's also different is that you don't have to always double click to create content. You can just simply create a hotspot. Let's say we want to create a transition hotspot, and we're gonna say like go to the next, and here you basically choose where you want to go. Let's say I want to go to scene number 2, and I want one of these transitions here. I can select a point of view if I want to or not, and then I can just save it, right? And that's going to basically create a hotspot, and I just need to drag it down in the right position, right? where I want to have it. All right. So now, if I want to go to a different scene, I can just open this drop-down menu here, and let's say I want to go to my scene number 2, right? And it's going to switch me and move me over to my scene number 2. And this is a 360 video, so we have a timeline now at the bottom here, and it's a little bit stretched, right? So this timeline is going to get a lot of updates. There's a couple of cool features that we're planning to release on this. I'm going to show you that later on when we do the product roadmap review. But for now, let me show you this, right? All this. All right, I'm going to stop here. So when you're dealing with 360 videos, we had this feature where you would be able to add this animation paths and fade ins and fade outs, right? But that wasn't very intuitive in using it, right? It was a little bit clunky how you set all that up, right? So we did when we did the redesign of our backhand, we focused a lot of our attention to make that a little bit smoother and easier to make, right? So in my case here, I created an info hotspot that basically, you know, has some dynamic settings, right, that allow you to define a path, right? So you can actually go point by point, second by second, and define where this should be, right? So I can basically, you know, make really I can create animations in a really easy and simple way now, right? So if I'm just gonna click here, finish, and I want to show you how this looks like in the preview window. So there's gonna be a boat here, it's gonna drive, right? And I can click on it. The information box opens up, right? Because I have this set up as pause other media, when I open something, the whole 360 video pause, right? But now if I close it, it's going to continue to play, right? And now it disappears. And I'm going to have another one here. It's going to pop up on top of the car, right? I'll try to catch this one, right? This one is open as a pop-up, right? It's basically, you know, just I didn't have anything clever to write into this, but I just wanted to show you how it looks like when it opens as a pop-up, right? And now if I close it, it's going to continue to play, right? So let me show you how this works. We're going to create a new hotspot. Let's go here at the beginning, right? And let's say we want to add something to this car here. So let's double click. We're going to create another info hotspot. And we're just gonna say, okay, let this be classic, and I'm gonna say car number 2 and test. And then, you know, like when you're dealing with 360 videos, you have this additional tab available where basically you can set up dynamic settings. And the first thing you have to do is enable this option, right? And set up a fade in and a fade out start, right? And we're gonna fade in start, we're gonna set to 0, fade end start, let's say 5 seconds, right? And then you can click here to define the path, right? How do you want this to look like, right? So we're gonna click this, and then there's this window that opens up, right? And we can jump here second by second, right? So let's go to the next second, and we're gonna drag this to this location, right? And then we go to the next location. Oh, and I guess the car went behind the bus. So we're gonna do like this, and so on and so on, right? And you drag this, and then you get the path in the end, right? I'm not gonna save this one because of the bus. Maybe I'll open the one that I had before so I can show you how this looks like. Right, so you can see here I'm at my number 1. I can go to my 2nd frame, 3rd frame, 4th frame, 5th, and so on, right? Or dynamic points, right? Like our developers decided that this is going to be called dynamic points, so these are the points that you set up when you're creating these dynamic paths. All right. So yeah, this was kind of a brief intro to, you know, how the new editor looks like, how it functions, how it works, right? I know that there's not a lot of difference. So as I mentioned in the beginning, we decided to go more for evolution than revolution at this point. But we did a lot of changes in the backend that are going to allow us to bring back some like interesting feature that we had in the past, plus upgrade the editor and the interactions with more advanced features over the summer, right? Okay, so the second part of the demo is talking about group sessions. So I'm gonna close this one. The first thing that we did is now, if I go back here, so when you're hosting group sessions, right? Now in the beginning, everybody had the function to be the option to be either the host or to join sessions, right? All right, so we have here 2 questions. Let me address that before I move forward. I just saw them. Can you save properties from one hotspot to use for others in the same project? Not at this moment, Sarah. We are planning to build some features around that would allow you to basically create your own kind of hotspot library. One thing that you can do is, like, if I open this one, let me go back here just a bit. You have the option here to copy hotspots, right? So you can basically, you know, if you have one hotspot that you want to reuse in the scene, right, you can just copy it. All the properties are going to get copied, right? But what you're probably asking and what's missing is, you know, if you would want to copy a hotspot into a different scene or maybe a different story or something like that. So that's something that we're still thinking of, how it should work, how it should function, and so on, to make it really smooth and easy for everybody to use. But it's definitely something that's in our minds, right? Probably that's going to be part of our when we're going to tackle like a styling upgrade. That's probably something that where we're going to include this kind of features, where we're going to basically do a revamp of how the hotspot creation works, how to save it in a library, or how to create styles, library styles or templates that you can always reuse, right? And Jason, you asked, can you add keyframes smaller intervals than seconds? For now, no. But you know, it's something that we're gonna gradually work towards, right? So right now we're at 1 second, and then we're gonna basically move that lower and lower, right? One of the considerations here was from our developers. They didn't want to have too much of a how did they call it, like misalignment with playback, right? So they decided to go for 1 second now, and because we're doing some timeline upgrades, as soon as that's done, we're probably going to be able to decrease the points in between. But on the other hand, you know, like if you're editing a 20-second path, right, you also don't want to go point by point, right? So it's like we need to figure out what would be the best minimum point interval between 2 points. All right, now to go back to our group sessions, right? So as I mentioned, you know, like in the beginning, everybody was able to create host group sessions or join group sessions. So what we added is actually under user roles. You can now, let's say we want to create a user role of somebody who's a trainer, and that trainer, we want them, you know, to have the option to host stuff, right? And let's say he also probably needs to have the option to view stuff, right? Stories, not stuff. And then maybe to manage user roles, right? So he can assign content to them, and that's it, right? So now this user role called trainer, and whoever is basically has that user role, right, is gonna have the option to host content, right? If they don't have this ticked, then they don't have the option to basically host these group sessions, right? If they do, if this is turned off, then whoever would be a trainer would only have the option to join, right? So this is more of a user management feature, but we saw that it made a lot of sense, because sometimes, you know, you don't want a trainee to host a group session, right? You want just, you know, people who have those, who should be able to do it, that are able to do it, and, you know, people who are trainees, they should only be able to join, right? All right. So the second thing that I want to mention is that now if you go here under download apps, we have this new one here called Windows, and this is basically going to download an exe file, right? And you're going to be able to install it on your PC, right? And then you're going to be able to run our player. That was basically, you know, it's basically the same as on the other platforms here on your desktop, right? And this basically allows you to run group sessions, not only between, you know, VR headsets, like, because initially we focused on Oculus Go and Oculus Quest, right? And you could only do these group sessions when you were in VR headsets. Windows is actually the first platform that allows you to join group sessions without having a VR headset, right? And if I show you how this actually works, so I'm gonna just go here from my full screen. Oop. I have it already installed on my PC here, right? So once you install it, you get this basic, you know, I made a shortcut, and if I run this, it's gonna open up the same view as, you know, in a VR headset. And then you can log in into your account. You're gonna see the content that's available to you. I already have this from my previous webinar. So this was like a group office tour demo that we did. And if I open this, right, I can see, you know, I have privileges to host or to join, right? So I'm gonna be, in this case, like if I would click here on join, I have this list of rooms here, but because nobody else is available right now, I can join any room, but I can host, right? So I'm gonna click on this one. And this is actually gonna start a new session right now. What I really wanna show you is basically, we did this demo in the previous session, so I'm not gonna go into details. But what I wanted to show you is that we added this console at the bottom. And this console kind of gives you a few user management or like interaction options, right? You can mute your audio, right? So when you're doing a group session, right, you don't have other people, you know, they can mute themselves so that you don't hear the background. This bottom two basically allow you to manage the pointers, right? You know, like in our one feature that we do have is like, that's pretty interesting in my opinion, is that, you know, you can see what other people are looking at and how they're interacting with. And if that bothers you, you can turn this off and all the dots from other users are going to disappear. If you want to hide your dots, right? So let's say you're participating in a session and you don't want to be distracting for your colleague, right? You can turn off your two dots by clicking on this one here, right? If you want to open the navigation map, you open this one over here, right? And it opens the map. And if you want to, if you're the host, right? And if you want to see all the list of participants, you can open this one here and it's going to show you all the connected users. One thing that's really cool about this now also is that you're able to pass on controls, right? So let's say if I would have one trainee here, I would first guide them through the session, show them how everything is done, and then I could give them control and they could repeat the whole process and I could just be a bystander and see if they went through it the right way or not, right? We see these group sessions really useful, not maybe with so many interactable features like what we had, you know, like let's say you're building a self-learning experience, right? You're going to add a lot of interactions, you're going to add a lot of, you know, additional labels, other media files inside your 360 scenes, right? Because, you know, you want to add those additional information there, right? But if you're doing group sessions, what we saw is that The users that did test it, they added a lot less media inside because you were connected over voice anyway, right? So when you were actually guiding trainees through the experience, you were able to just point out certain things and show it to them, right? So basically, what we saw is that when people were using these group sessions, right, the stories were a bit more basic, but the reason for that was because we were connected over voice live, right? And they were able to explain to them, right, exactly what they're looking at and how they should be using something or what they should be doing in a certain scene, right? So yeah, and this middle one here actually opens up the timeline, right? So if this would be a 360 video, not a 360 image, you could basically open this up and you would see a timeline here and you could skip to the point of your choosing, right? So yeah, these were some of the updates that we did on the group session part. I'm gonna close this one here now and go back to my slides here. So are there any questions about the editor, about the group sessions? Let's see. Are the projects saved in an archive for future use? Aurelian, I'm not sure if I understand what you mean here. The projects can always be exported, right? So you can always export a project. It's going to give you a SCORM wrap file, right? And those files, you can save them for, on your computer. And if any time in the future you want to update it, you can open a new account, upload those files, right? And you're gonna basically be able to edit them again, right? So if you're archiving stuff, you can basically just export it, and that zip folder that you get is gonna be is your project file, right? So that's what you would be using for archiving. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the roadmap, so you know what we're working on, what we're planning to do. The timeline for this is summer 2020, but it's this is a bit flexible. One thing that we are doing with some enterprise level clients is that if they have any specific requests, right, and they're ready to pay for them, we do prioritize those features, right? So we might move something a little bit back or something a little bit forward, right? Soon I'll address that in just a bit. All right, so we do know that we are going to do at least these 4 items from our roadmap during the summer, right? One is including a timeline in the editor, right? And a timeline, with that I mean that you're going to basically able to see the items on the editor, when do they appear, when do they disappear, and what's really interesting is we want to include that on 360 images as well, right? So you could have a 360 image, let's say this 360 image is going to be 30-second long, right? And you're going to be able to then set up, when something appears or disappears and so on, right? Another, the second item here is actually what Insun you were asking. So basically group session expansion and support. So we're going to be adding some new platforms. I'm going to talk about this in just a bit because this is actually my next slide. The third one is what we really like. This kind of ties into the changes that we made in our editor right now, right? And the underlying changes that we made are going to allow us to basically support multiple 360 media files in a single scene, right? So you could add a sequence of 360 images one by one into one individual scene, right? And that basically is going to help you create a little bit more of a, let's say, a linear story flow, or maybe when you want to add like different perspectives. Let's say you're using 360 videos and you're merging different clips, right? So this is gonna this is gonna basically help some of our users that were going before in, let's say, into Adobe Premiere and cutting 360 videos there and putting different scenes together. we're planning to enable that in our editor natively, right? And the fourth one is something we call elements, and elements are going to be more there to enrich the scenes, right? Because right now the like what we're not really satisfied with anymore is this you know, like you basically create a hotspot, which can be a button or a polygon or something like that, and then you add interaction on top, right? So we want to expand on what kind of, you know, hotspot types you can add, right? And we're going to be calling this elements, right? So I'm going to touch this last. So group session platform support expansion, right? So what, like, our goal is over the summer to bring group sessions out of our beta program and make it available for general use. And when we do that, the platforms that are going to be supported are going to be Oculus, Windows, Android, iOS, and very likely Mac OS, right? That one is still something that we're working on, but at least for the first 5, I can say that they're going to be available. One thing that we're not sure if you're going to be able to finish over the summer is browser-based group session support, right? The way the group sessions work, right, the way we sync all the interactions and audio and all that stuff, it works really well when the content is pre-downloaded, right? And that is something that our apps do really well, right? But in browsers, we have to basically stream content to you, right? Which is a little bit trickier, right? So if you have one trainee in one location doing something, right? A trainer doing something, right? You don't want the trainee who's logged in through a browser, right? To not see what they're doing, right? Because we have to stream the files and the interactions and audio and so and all that stuff, right? And it's really problematic if you are if they have poor connectivity or poor bandwidth or something like that. So these browsers are a little bit trickier, and probably that's going to be addressed after the summer, right? But at least all of our apps, all our platforms that support apps right now are going to have this group session support, right? So that kind of answers your question in soon, right? That's going to be like the cross-platform support that's going to be available that you can expect in probably in the next month or so. The second part here is the timeline and multiple media in one scene, right? So, you know, I showed you before like all those animations that we did, right? But it's still a little bit tricky because you have to set up where the fade in is, where the fade out is, and so on, right? And you kind of have to understand how your 360 video looks like, and you have to kind of remember where something basically, you know, should fade in and fade out, right? Because you have to set it as a number. So one thing that we're really excited about is bringing those elements like hotspots when they fade in and fade out as elements on the timeline, right? So you could just basically, you know, say like on a timeline, stretch it a little to the left, to the right, and so on to define where something should pop in and pop out, right? And I think that's gonna basically help a lot with managing those, you know, animation paths. But also on, you know, like I also mentioned that timelines are gonna be now available on 360 images as well, right? So you could add, let's say, a 360 image of a room, add some voiceover, right? And then maybe say like, you know, at 10 second, I want this to fade in, and then I want it to be visible all the way to the end, right? And in that way, we feel that it's going to be possible to make very interesting scenes, even though you might not be using like a 360 video, yeah, right? You might just use like a 360 image and then make that image look like it's basically a more, you know, as a video basically, right? Because it's going to have a timeline. Yeah, so that's one that I'm pretty excited about because it's going to make a lot of the editing much simpler, right? And the second one is basically, you know, adding multiple files in multiple media files, 360 media files in one scene. And that's basically going to mean that, you know, you're going to, let's say, add a 360 video, maybe a 360 image, and then another 360 video. And all of that is going to be available in one scene. So when you're going to be editing all that stuff, right, there's not going to be any need for transitions, right? I know some of you wanted to use like, you know, we get this question a lot, like, is it possible to make like an auto transition from a 360 image, right? Right now that wouldn't be possible because in a 360 image, the user needs to always make that interaction to start a transition, right? But if a 360 image has now a timeline, right? Then it means that, you know, we can set up like an auto transition at the end to move to the next scene or something like that. Or you can just simply add all your 360 images into one scene and make a completely linear storyline, right? Yeah, so these are like this timeline and multiple media in one scene are kind of interconnected. Probably the timeline one will be finished sooner, and then multiple media in one scene is going to be added after that. And now the last one, so the elements, right? So the elements is something that we want to enable more content to reach 360 scenes, right? As I mentioned before, you know, like right now the interactions that how everything works is like you set up a hotspot or a polygon, and then, you know, something happens once that's interacted with, right? And what we want to do is basically, you know, break that link where you would basically define like, okay, I want to add some assets to my 360 scene, right? Let's say I have my 360 image and I want to add a couple of 3D models inside there, right? So I took a screenshot here from one of our previous beta features where you were already able to add 3D models. So that's one thing like we want to bring back, like giving you the option to basically add 3D models, images, videos, text, symbols natively inside your 360 scene, right? So you can basically just add them there, and then you can decide if that content is static, which basically means, or passive, let's call it passive, which basically means, you know, that it's just there to make your scenes more content rich, right? Or later on, you're going to be able to define, you know, like if, you know, somebody clicks on this deer here, right, you could then add an interaction, what happens next, right? Like right now in this current state, our interactions are not really complex. They're pretty straightforward, right? You click, something happens, right? But what's going to be interesting then, like once these elements are done, right, and you set up your scenes, we're going to be able to add multiple functions to what you do on, let's say, you can have something, I'm a little complicated here, but this is really exciting. Let's say, you know, we have this deer, you're going to click on it, you're going to say like, okay, show some text once you click on it, and then on close, you want something else to happen, right? So this is bringing these elements inside our 360 editor gives us a very, very good foundation to make this, to make available this, you know, advanced interactions. We call this like if this, then that interactions, right? So if somebody opens something up, something else might appear somewhere else, right? And basically having this kind of functionalities are gonna basically unlock a lot more content creation options in the future, right? So this is gonna allow a lot of flexibility on what kind of you know, triggers you can set up, what kind of content you can set up, and so on. But we have to do it step by step. And the first step in our in the authoring process is bringing in these elements, right? So you can actually set up the visual cues in your 360 scenes, and then once that's done, we're gonna add probably another let's say type that we're gonna call functions, and you're going to tie elements with functions, right? And then with content and so on. So this element is probably the one that's going to be the hardest to do, because there's it's when you're doing this in browsers, there's a lot of stuff you have to be careful about. But we're definitely planning to bring in this by the end of summer, hopefully even sooner, so we can start playing around with those functions and all that stuff a little bit faster. But yeah, I think this is something that I'm really excited about. And all the other features that we're doing here that I mentioned, I think they're really going to connect everything that we've been working on this year into a really nice package that's going to basically unlock some new levels of creativity for all our authoring users. So yeah, that's kind of it, what I had for my webinar today. I see I'm kind of on point. It was 46 minutes, but let's say in the beginning we had a few minutes of just seeing if other people will join. Are there still any questions here? Let me check the chat here. I answered this one with the archives. Great to see that everybody's excited about this stuff. Okay, can you brand the project content? So yeah, you can brand it in a way that, let's say you would add logos inside, use your kind of brand colors, symbols, and so on. You can even, under story properties, I think you can add like a custom logo that's overlaid if somebody is viewing this in a browser. We don't display that in VR headsets because it would look very weird if there would be a logo in front of you all the time. But yeah, there are certain levels of branding you can do. If you're talking more about, if you can brand the whole experience, like on a custom domain and so on, that is something that we are kind of offering more to enterprise users, where the software is deployed on a special server, and they can connect their domains to it. There are some ways of how you can mask a domain, like you can use, let's say, the existing Viar360 link of your subdomain, right? And then you can mask it with a different domain, but that's out of my technical skills. Okay, we have another question. If it's if you can do live streaming. No, we're not, like our content creation tools are not aimed towards live streaming, right? So we might be able to do that sometime in the future, but we feel that, like if you want to do live streaming, YouTube is pretty great at that. It allows you to, send your content to millions of users, and it's pretty efficient, right? We're using it right now. So it's not really the position where we would like to be in, right, or compete with that. But what we think, like, where we offer value is like, those group sessions that we mentioned, right? That's not kind of live streaming because you still need to build your content beforehand. And then when you're basically watching the content over our apps, right, it's not live streamed, right? It's pre-downloaded, and then we connect you and sync the scenes and the interactions and so on. But basically, that would be our take on, live trainings, right? Okay, Jason, you're asking. Yeah, you can add. Let me open up here my editor again. So if I go to, let's go to our editor demo here. Let's open this beta. So you can actually, or let me open this one here because I was playing around with something here. So there's a polygon here, right? And this polygon is, if I preview it, I actually try to embed a Wikipedia page. So if I click on it, it opens up the Wikipedia page, and it's basically clickable, and it takes you to Tower Bridge, right? So yeah, you can definitely embed. I'll open this for you. Custom code, right? So it's basically some code that I inserted in the HTML hotspot. If you're just talking more about like adding links, like hyperlinks, you can use this hyperlink hotspot, and it's gonna just basically send the viewer to a different page. I do have to say that if you're using this in a VR headset, it's gonna open up the, let's say, Oculus browser, right? We're not able to open, our apps don't have a native browser within the app, right? So it doesn't need to open the browser in the actual headset operating system, right? And one thing that I might have skipped here, but I'm not sure if you catch that, is that we did a lot of work on our streaming capacity as well. So now here, if you look at this gear here, we added this auto function here, right? So beforehand, you had to manually switch if you wanted to go, let's say, from 180 to 4K, right? Which was a little bit annoying if you had a really good connection, right? Why would you want to view content at 180 if you can go all the way to 4K, right? So we added this function to auto switch streaming resolution if your bandwidth allows it, right? So if you have this set up at auto and you play it, right, it's gonna update the resolution, right, automatically, right? You can see here that it actually switched right now for me. So this is something that that we also worked on, but maybe we didn't point it out in the webinar. All right. What else do we have here? So question hotspots I answered. External links I answered. I'm not sure what this means, like about exe files. I'm not sure about that one. Aurelian, VR works with goggles. Well, it works with the ones that we support, right? So here we have Oculus Go, Oculus Quest, and Vive Focus Plus, right? Those are the ones that we currently support. You can use Android and iOS and use Google Cardboard mode with them, right? So these two basically allow you to either view it in panorama or in, VR through Google Cardboard. While these three here are just VR only, right? And Windows for now is basically just panorama. We're gonna see if we're gonna be adding Windows virtual reality functionality. But for now, like our goal, like what we focused on always was the untethered devices, right? And these are the ones that are basically dominating the space at this point. Let's see if there's anything else. Okay. Yeah, I know that I know what exe files are. I just didn't understand what the question is about them. So if you download Windows app here, you're gonna get an exe file that you install, right? And then that basically is gonna allow you to play the content on your PC, right? If you're asking me if you're able to export your stories as exe files, right? Then no, you actually get a zip folder, and that zip folder has all the content inside to open it in a browser, right? So let's say if you would use like Firefox or something like that, it has a player inside, and I think it would allow you to open that content from your PC. Otherwise, you just need to upload it to a server somewhere, and it's gonna work. Sarah, yeah, you can embed surveys. Yeah, so we actually do have some. It's actually funny because some of the larger companies we work with, they have a lot of these questionnaires and quizzes and all that stuff already prepared in something else. So they would be embedding that in through the HTML hotspot. But I do need to warn you that sometimes it might be a bit tricky for Oculus to visualize that. So it's not 100% certain that it's going to work in the VR headset. So you have to be careful because when you're embedding something, that's something that we are not able to control, right? It's basically web content that's pulled from somewhere else. So just if you're going to be doing something like that, just test it out, right? And we're gonna see if it works or not. Can you edit in VR? No. The editing is with Viar360. All the editing is gonna happen on a normal screen, right? We just saw that people are more used of that kind of access, and I think that's how we're gonna keep it for now. The actual authoring process of building a good, interesting story is already relatively complicated. So all right, are there any more questions? Otherwise, I think that's it for today. Let me know, guys, if you have anything else. Otherwise, you can always reach me over, just shoot an email to support at viar360.com, and somebody from our team is gonna get back to you. We do have some questions. I'm not sure if I understand this. The first one, is there no way to overlap or edit at all? You are able to edit content. This is what we focused on in the beginning of our webinar here. But maybe you're asking if you're, like live stream editing, then no. Mike, no, that's something that you would have to use a different tool. I know that you can manage this tilt options in Photoshop. You can do that. It has a very good 360 view, actually. And I think there's also a couple of web-based tools that allow you to manage the tilt and rotation. All right. Okay, so thanks, guys. Thank you for joining. I'm gonna finish this at this point because we used our 60 minutes today. It was great talking to all of you, and I really hope I'll see you next time at our next webinar. Thank you. Yeah, and if you have any additional questions, just shoot them over to me over email, and we'll address them. Thanks.